Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's a blustery Saturday here in San Francisco, and I'm out for a walk, as I often am. Enjoying the outside of the box that nature comprises. I remember when I first came here, I thought about the park. Well, that's not really nature. The humans made that stuff. That used to all be sand dunes. It's like your backyard garden. It's artificial. Yeah, I lifted my nose in the general direction of Golden Gate Park and snubbed it a little bit. But then I saw the majesty of the cypresses and the pines, and then eventually being a bit of an organic druid, born that way rather than trained, I had experiences that affirmed in me the sense that wherever the living beings are, there you will find nature. And some of us become conservators of the spirit of the living places, and we carry that spirit into representational culture, into cities, into the places where the humans, having been tragically deprived of their origins and faculties and ways of being, practice fictions that resemble what they lost, but cannot return it to their experience. And so it's an experience that resembles eating food that doesn't satiate your body's need for nourishment, or drinking. Try to imagine drinking something that just makes you thirstier every time you drink it. Of course, we have experiences of some such things. We call them addictions. They may temporarily satiate a need, or perhaps they occlude an impoverishment or hunger briefly, thus soothing or calming us. But then with each iteration of the use of the substance, along with the occlusion of the impoverishment it covers over, comes the inception of the temporal recursion of the need for the substance, right? You don't necessarily want a cigarette right after smoking one, but within 15 to 30, 40 minutes, if you're well addicted, you will. Again. And the longer that you wait, the more insistent that desire will become. For many of us, once addicted. It's not a law, it's a principle. But some of us carry the spirit of the living places, and similarly we may carry the spirit of origin, which is ordinarily associated with religion or the divine. We carry that into into the cities and essentially the graveyards of our souls, our meaningful relationships, our identities. It's not surprising that couples have difficulty remaining together in contexts that are nearly entirely counterfeited and forgeries of what would otherwise be natural to us humans, which is mutual concern, rescue, healing, mutually rewarding endeavors, play, creativity, divination, oracular sensing, rejuvenation, revitalization, celebration. These are the things. These are the branches on the real, the authentic tree of our humanity. Yeah. I was reading something so ridiculous. I think it was by a guy named Bill Connors. I'm not sure. I would like to name him just because what I saw was so absurd. And perhaps it's not Bill's fault. Right? Perhaps someone's quoting him. But in order to have quoted him, he must have somewhere presented publicly the idea. And what he was doing was, by the way, what I'm doing right here is almost as ironic because I'm defaming someone, which is a misuse of my virtues and a misuse of my capacity for speech. Nonetheless, it can be exemplary to demonstrate such misuse, particularly if it's engaged in consciously. There's weird ways that irony can be inverted, and this is one of them. To consciously demonstrate a misuse of one of our faculties might in fact invert it. In any case, Bill was railing against what he called performative charity. There were 12 paragraphs of Bill railing against performative charity, saying, don't do this. If you're going to be charitable in secret. Which is a reasonably virtuous concept. The problem is that once you start railing against performative charity in public, you're exemplifying performative virtue. And once you have the concern about performativeness, you can see how quickly and easily this becomes very ironic. Because you're simply talking about the difference between consciously engaging in virtue and unconsciously engaging in virtue. And Bill is saying that real virtue is unconscious. Well, is it really, Bill? Is that really true? Because that would mean that every desire to have ever written a book or perform a public piece of music, that would mean that the entire scope of performative humanity is somehow wrong. Is that true? That sound right to you? Think about it. Now, there are certainly performances we'd be better off without. And there's some kinds of fakery and forgery that we would certainly be better off without. But does that mean that the entire domain of the emulation of virtue or skill in public is bad?
So that enhanced the experience a lot. And then Ty was there.
No, I can't imagine it could be. In fact, humans, being unimaginably sensitive to observation, will naturally learn a broad array of display behaviors. And in fact, asking for aid from another being, calling out for help in a crisis, these are display behaviors. Shall we indict them for their possible performative nature? Well, what is meant by performative here? I suppose that the fundamental sense is action engaged in specifically to receive the acclaim, praise, or rewards, right? It means fake virtue, fake goodness, of the kind that we regularly see rising to the top of the froth on the internet, as what we refer to generally. There are exceptions here, I don't want to categorize everyone, but as influencers, and to some degree what we could call digital creators, even though I myself fall into that category, so certainly not an influencer. Not yet. So what we mean are people who are fishing for attention, essentially, right? And we all do that to some degree, I think, in ways unique to each of us and our situations. If we didn't fish for attention, we might never get any. If, unless we are members of a community that is active and vital, alive, and exchange, in common mutual flesh presence, right? Meat presence, together. We see each other's faces. We hear each other's voices, not digital representations of them. We smell each other's bodies and hair and breath. And we are animals together. So I thought Bill's, 12-paragraph tirade against performative charity was profoundly ironic. And, this is the problem with the whole complex, most of the complex that surrounds wokeness, quote unquote. Yes, of course, we should be educated about each other's uniqueness, about each other's historical and present day suffering, about injustice. But let's take that in a direction that brings us together, because if we take it in a direction that's primed for indictment and judgment and cancellation and so forth, so we're not to speak of certain matters, or we not belonging to certain groups shall remain our concerns, perspectives, knowledge, history, opinions, desires, and so forth shall remain unheard, shall be silenced. So, for example, as a man, I have nothing to say about women because I don't have a womb. Well, I was a womb. A womb is where I came from. So, something is wrong with the idea that as a man, I have nothing to contribute to the conversation. And those of you who know me personally and have had, conversations with me on these topics are well aware that I have insights about the nature of being a woman, female, that are extremely uncommon even among women, and some of which are profound. Similarly, women who have carefully observed and been fascinated by men will naturally have insights about us that I would not want silenced because they don't have testicles. The complex of wokeness is filled with a contagious potential for indictment. And to the degree that we expend our vitality and energy and interest there, it will be lost in forward progressive momentum. Prisoneering is a shitty investment of human potential. Punishing the past, dumb idea. Mostly, with very few exceptions, in my view. And by all means, correct me. You know, if you've got what it takes, step up. We'll have a chat. But what I'm actually here to talk about today is a tangential but related topic. In a recent conversation with a close friend who, at 3 years old, asked her mother, "What does nothing look like?" And her mother first said, "It's blackness." Which, yeah, I can see all the problems that arise from what I've just said in the minds of those who would transfer the topic to ethnicity, for example. She protested, no, that's something. Blackness is something. And then her mother said, well, it's whiteness. And she protested again, no, that's something. What is the appearance of nothing? She didn't use the word appearance. She said, what does it look like? And her mother said, I don't know. Now that answer is quite profound. But as we were speaking, and I've had this conversation with her a few times, and our minds are quickened by each other's locality in a way that usually leads to inspiration and discovery and wonder and play and all of the beautiful features that enliven, revitalize, and give birth to our intelligences. And I said, perhaps the likeness of nothing is no likeness whatsoever. Perhaps it is the absence of a likeness that allows the possibility of consciousness at all, of awareness at all. Right? What if what it looks like, what if what nothing looks like is, quote, not looking, unquote? Because think about a mirror. Its entire capacity depends upon the absence of pre-existing figures in it, right? And what if thought, awareness, and intelligence are similar? They are unique modal expressions, modal exemplars of the possibilities, the urgencies, the gravities of non-containment, right? Of non-likeness. When we listen to music or we watch a film or a show, right? It begins with us not being the musicians, not being the actors, not being the story. Right? It all starts with notness. And this is very astonishing because we rarely consider this. When we think about consciousness, we think it's something. But what if it is an array of potentials that arise from the absencing of many potential, many features, many characteristics, one of which is unity, right? Because if everything is truly all one, then there appears to be no differentiating characteristics to anything, because all characteristics belong to one indissoluble. I mean, you hear noises like this in the Pledge of Allegiance and stuff in America. One nation under God, one, right? Oneness. So, something very profound here about non-likeness. And my brilliant friend, who I love, she was making these sort of double negations, like, that resemble something like, to see what seeing is, you must not see the unseen, all of the unseen things that comprise the context of which seeing becomes the possibility of the fulfillment, the unique fulfillment of. It's very difficult to rephrase what she said because her unique skill with complex layered negations, which I would argue is a fundamentally feminine skill. Perhaps the first words of my sister and I are indicative of something profound about being men and women. Mine were, "I go." A woman could certainly have the same phrase as her first phrase, but my sister's were, "No." It's that simple. Nope. And negation turns out to be absolutely imperatively fundamental to any kind of affirmation or positive statement, including the possibility of vision. Light requires darkness. Vision requires blindness. Speech requires muteness, silence. So too music. Dance emerges from stillness. Think about John Cage in terms of music, the silent artist who illustrated the profundity of silence and its relationship to music. I don't remember the exact number, but I think he had a piece that was called something like 33 and a third. And there was a grand piano on the stage, came out and sat at it for 33 and a third minutes, did nothing. Now imagine what was going on in the audience, because it was definitely creating an effect, right? It just wasn't, it was the total defiance of the expectation of music that became itself a kind of a meta-music, right? A meta-musical thing. How profound this must have been for the first experiencers of it. And if they did not know what to expect for any sequential experiencers. So when I say that negation is a primordial power of the feminine, we should pay close attention, right? It's fundamental. My friend also said, think about what happens when you begin a poem with O. And I thought, does she mean the letter O? Does she mean the word OH? Does she mean the word O? Which can be different from the letter O. And she said, think of how that just is an invocation of almost absolute vulnerability. And it blew me away to consider that, for I too, as a young poet, occasionally, there's probably going to be some wind noise here, just ironic and beautiful. But I too occasionally was so deranged and or bold and or experimental as to just begin a poem with the letter O. As a kind of as an exclamatory invitation. Oh, how I saw, oh, how I felt the first shards of dawn penetrating through the curtains of my soul in the morning. Oh. And then I spoke of the vulnerability of encompassment, to encompass, right? Vaginally to encompass. But not just vaginally, with the intelligence, with awareness, with consciousness, with relationship, to encompass, right, to contain. Oh, there's a problem? Well, I shall contain the problem, right? Which, in fact, the history of human reproduction and sexuality probably has a lot to do with the containment of a problem. And what is the problem? It's rigidity, right? It's concreteness, it's insistent, rhythmic penetration and so forth. Yes, encompassment. But not just to encompass a problem, right? Like the child isn't a problem when encompassed by our loving embrace. The child is, we are both nurtured, we are both revitalized, remembered to our origins. We are, there's embracing, there's not just the more or less seemingly or superficially seeming explicit concept of sex, which I would argue that humans are wildly confused about, generally speaking, and the moderns, perhaps more than any people in the history of our species, because we grow up in a situation where sexuality is a product, a commodity, and it's often rendered very explicitly to us, particularly in the catastrophically tragic and unfortunate existence of what we refer to as pornography. And some will say, oh, there was pornography long ago. Yeah, no, there wasn't, actually. There's nothing like the possibility of the hell-making nightmare that is pornography today. Vicious, tyrannical, horrifying. Eros and porn are not the same thing. So our conversation continued, and she spoke about her desire is the absence of negation, right, which is very trippy. Basically what she said was that what guides her desire isn't the presence of desire, it's the absence of antipathy, right? And that's just brilliant. It's probably very common in all kinds of people, but particularly women. The absence of antipathy must be quite rare, especially because if you have constant approaches by idiotic males, or even by sophisticated males, or you have males mimicking sophistication, and so forth. So yeah, the absence of antipathy, what she called the absence of no, is amazingly profound and could be a really useful guide to being human. Right? Just follow the absence of no. Because, then we spoke of the daimons, right? And Socrates' daimon, which is storied to have never said any positive thing, but only told Socrates what not to do. And when something was wrong or should not be done, or something wrong had been done, and spoke rarely, and only when Socrates was in a kind of a fugue state. He was epileptic. He had a specific kind of epilepsy, we think. So yes, these things are extremely important. Someone just walked by with a phone on their arm, and the name of the person they were talking to was displayed on the phone, which I thought was kind of unsubtle. So yes, the still small voice, right, which a few times in my life has just said no, and often this is the only thing it will say no. And one time I was about to change lanes and it was just don't. And it was like someone who wasn't me spoke in my ear, and I looked, and again, I had checked carefully. I'd turned my head over my right shoulder as my father taught me before changing lanes to my right. There was nothing there. There was nothing in my rear view. I turned again after hearing stop, is what it actually said, I think. And there was a car in my blind spot that I would have veered right into had I not heeded that. There was another time when it advised me not to kiss a girl who was with me, and I ignored that to my grave peril and to staggering future consequence. So the absence of no is the absence of the advisor's negations, right? The sort of soul voice's negations, and that's a very profound thing. We might think of it as the opposite of true north on the compass, by which north becomes meaningful, right? Because without that opposite of north, what is the use of knowing north? It doesn't help you. You know, if north is in any old direction, again, it doesn't help you. Watching people walk their dogs, the intrepidness of the dog in a world of humans. It would be like, imagine that, just take the concept and translate it to, you're a leashed human on a world of aliens that are vastly more advanced than humans. And you adore them and they adore you, but you come from a completely other world than theirs, right? Yeah, the intrepidness, the angelic nature of the dogs, which, by the way, dogs are mostly about yes, right? I'll just say yes, and you get excited, you pretend to be excited, the dog becomes very excited, right? Just look excited. The dog doesn't care. Why are you excited? They're just happy. Oh, you're excited? I'm excited too. Let's be excited together, right? Try that with the cat. See how that works. You know, the cat. Think about that. Try that with the cat sometimes. Just get really excited. See what happens with the cat. The cat will look at you like you're broken in the mind. Right? It'll just look at you like, what the fuck has gone wrong in your 3-neuron Petri dish that you call a brain? Yeah, the cats are brilliantly, look, the what? Okay, the distinctions between the gender stereotypes. Sorry, I didn't mean to make so much dust.
I know you.
The distinctions the gender stereotypes can be draconian and stupidifying. That's true. They can be. Does that mean they only are? Right? It's the same problem with the idea of performative charity. Right? Is it only bad? If you take a picture of yourself giving the money to the holy person, the homeless person, for example, that was the example that this guy gave, Bill, whoever the hell he is. Is it only bad? No. Some of the features of the stereotypical qualities of gender are extremely important to have in consciousness because gender is a holotype, a holophore, a fundamental basis for the understanding of differentiation in identity matrices, right? So you're going to throw that away? That's a dumb idea. You might be, it's like, well, these boats don't need hulls, we just need oars. All you need is a couple of oars and you're fine. Never mind that hull thing. That's just a stereotype, that hull, right? Airplanes don't need a fuselage. It's just wings. That's all. Just wings. With some engines on the wings, you're fine. Nothing in the middle of them. Nothing in there. But my friend actually said something so amazing that really blew my mind because it had never occurred to me. And we had so many of these little highlights where we were wandering around together in our conversation and marveling at each other's unique intelligences and ways of seeing and feeling and knowing and so forth. And one of the things she said about her question was that it was like her question about nothing, right? She imagined transparency on top of transparency, like what she called clear on clear. And later when we were talking about the absence of no, she said something very profound, which was, every time a man has kissed me, I felt no, 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 no. And I don't know exactly what she meant, but by a man. I think, yeah, it's very complicated. But what she said was that the absence, right, the negation of a gender stereotype is the direction of yes in her. It's the direction of no knows, right? It's an anti-knowing, anti-knowing. And so what she was saying was really profound, because it had never occurred to me in my life that the presence of a gender stereotype could mean the defection from a relation, right? Because now, instead of relating with the person we're with, the being who's before and with us, we're relating with them through a set of frames that are traps. And so we might pay more attention to the frame than our partner. In other words, we could be cheating on our partner with the frame of a gender stereotype. And that was an absolutely mind-blowing proposition. Nothing even vaguely similar to that had ever occurred to me, except that I saw inside the relationship of some friends who I sometimes counsel, I saw the potential to cheat on one's partner not with another human being, but with one's history of traumatic experiences, so that we defect from the relationship not to kiss somebody else, but to kiss something else, right? Which is our historical investment in our personal traumatic history and problems and relationships and so forth, right? So it became clear to me that
You guys want to rent a boat?
Yeah.
one could, quote, cheat in a relationship not with a person, but with a framework. And that blew my mind. And what my friend here is saying is something very similar, except the framework is much more fundamental. It's not the history of my personal trauma or relationships or fears or vulnerabilities. It's the history of my masculinity and my identification with that. Right? I identify as a man, which is true, I do. Right? And so any threat to that, and I'll defect right now, right? Without consideration for the bond. Goodbye, right? Threaten my masculinity, I'm out of here. Or threaten my relationship with it, right? Threaten my identity as a masculine being. Now, it doesn't mean I will leave a relationship at the slightest hint of a threat to my virility or masculine identity or anything. In fact, quite the opposite. I'm relatively well known to be an effeminate male. I'm not merely effeminate. I'm sort of an in-between, a bridge person, right, between the two stereotypes. But I wouldn't toss those stereotypes. At the same time, it was fascinating to hear my friend opine on the problem of there being a frame and how that's a trap and how dangerous it is and how it doesn't feel right or it doesn't feel safe. And that's brilliant. Oh my God, what an insightful, articulate observation of being. Right? And she didn't just say, a man is a bad, right, or a woman is a bad. She was like, no, the existence of any of those frames is a problem. I don't trust it. It doesn't feel right. In the intimate, in the context of an intimate situation. And yeah, that was just mind-blowingly profound. But it gets even more interesting. So then we started talking about frameworks in consciousness, and we went back to the original question of nothing. What is the likeness of nothing whatsoever? And the clear on clear is actually a description of what feels safe for my friend in the domain of gender identity, right? No gender identity on this side, no gender identity on that side, safe. Interesting, attractive, feels good, feels the right kind of vulnerable, right? Not clear on clear, much like her concept of the appearance of nothing. But then we were, that person started to turn into a street that isn't a street. How often I've been that person in my mind. I tried to turn onto a one-way street in the wrong direction, or something that isn't a street that appeared to be one for a moment. So, I have this slogan that I like, and I'm not a huge fan of slogans, but this one might be very important in our time, and the slogan is simply "No more presidents. We've had enough of this." This is a bad fucking idea, especially around here. And if that isn't obvious, given the candidates, I don't know what obvious means. But given the context of our conversation, my friend and I suddenly blurted out, "No more references." And she's like, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Just suspend the urge to make the gesture of reference in consciousness." And she was like, "Oh, right." And that became a mind-blowing exploration, because if you start from the position of the ability to suspend the urge to reference in consciousness, which is to collapse consciousness toward the observation and evaluation of identities, right? If you suspend that urge, you have absolute freedom. To the degree you can suspend that urge, and as long as you suspend that urge, all of your liberties are intact. Right? The moment that you start to collapse it, or if you don't have the ability to suspend that, if you don't begin at the top of the cone, so to speak, with the suspension of the urge to reference, right? And you start at the bottom, which is trapped in the urge to reference, to discern identities, to evaluate, to judge them, then you are truly trapped. It's a mess. You are very unlikely to rise up that cone. It's conceivable, right? For example, at the moment, I am suggesting it in language. I'm suggesting it conceptually, right? The suspension of the urge to reference in consciousness. Actually, the urge to make the gesture of referencing, which is very similar to the gesture of pointing. Right? An urge that in Blackfoot culture is traditionally frowned upon. You don't point. It's not simply because it's rude. It is penetrative, energetically penetrative, but also it creates a problem. It creates a variety of problems. If the gaze is a projection from the eyes into the world, it encourages the penetrative version of the gaze, rather than the gravitic, right? Rather than drawing toward one, or shedding light equally on all things. She spoke of the difference between lantern consciousness and spotlight consciousness, which is very important. My friend did, and a crucial feature of our conversation, because the spotlight consciousness really resembles a knife, whereas the lantern consciousness really resembles water. Right, just flowing, encompassing, lifting all boats with one tide, so to speak. Rather than singling one boat out for lifting and sinking all others. So all of these ideas are profound. But the crazy thing that happened was I have been a student of Zen since I was about 24. So that's 46 years. I don't always sit, but I do go through long phases of regular sitting, and I was a serious Zen student for many years. As those of you who know my videos probably are aware, I began my practice with John Tarrant Roshi, Dharma heir of Robert Aitken Roshi, who might be a Dharma heir of Suzuki Roshi, but I don't remember Robert Aitken's teacher. And then when I came to the city, I studied here with Joe Bobro for quite some time. And I have a lot of reverence for Aitken and Tarrant. I'll not say much beyond that. So why is this relevant? Well, often the first koan one is given in Rinzai Zen tradition, although California Diamond Sangha, Tarrant Roshi's school, I think, is not purely Rinzai. It's sort of a mix of Rinzai and Soto traditions, if I understand it correctly, intellectually, which is really the opposite of understanding in the first place. But one is often given a koan, and quite frequently this koan. It's a meditation point. It's like it's a thing to focus the mind upon. Some people think of a koan as a question that has to be answered. It's not entirely true. It's not completely wrong, but it's also just incorrect. It's a perspective from outside Zen. And it's because the teacher will request the teacher will often ask in Dokusan, which is a private interview that occurs during the sitting practice. The teacher will inquire of the student, what's going on? Have you gotten anywhere, so to speak? What's happening? Who are you? Where did you come from? What are you doing here? And effectively, the teacher is inquiring into progress specifically with the koan, which in many cases is mu, right? Mo is more like what John Tarrant would say, to emulate him. But it's a public case in Japanese or Chinese. Chao Chu, the old Buddha, was with 3 monks. They were walking along a path. The monks came across a dog. They're up ahead of him, and the monks began arguing about whether or not the dog has Buddha nature, because in their culture, a dog is a disgusting, sort of vermin-ridden thing, to be avoided and understood as reprehensible and so forth, which is a fairly bizarre idea when you think about dogs, right? How did this idea come about? What the hell convinced people? What is because it seems servile? What could possibly be the cause of reviling the nobility of the creatures that we call canines? It's never really occurred to me before. But in any case, in their culture, the people eat dogs, I guess, maybe, or they just kill them, and they think maybe they're not domesticated, right? So they rove in packs and kill the farm animals and so forth. Who knows what the cause of their hatred of the animal is? But the monks are arguing. The Buddha clearly said all beings have true nature. They have intrinsic Buddha nature. All beings, meaning, ants and elephants and rabbits and whales, dogs, all of them. And so the monks are arguing, surely this disgusting animal has or does not have Buddha nature. So Chaochu, or Joshu in Japanese, comes along and sees the monks arguing, and they turn to him and say, tell us, does the dog have Buddha nature or not? And Joshu says, moo. Or, oh. Or even what those people are saying over there. Ah! Which would be a very interesting answer, actually. And one of the monks awakens to his true nature when he hears Joshu say moo, which is essentially the equivalent of no. How could it be, right? But how could it be that the dog does not have Buddha nature? The Buddha was lying about all beings having Buddha nature, right? But in fact, what it turns out is that what Joshu is saying no to isn't necessarily the question. It's the motivation of the question, which is the urge to make the gesture of reference in consciousness and then to engage in evaluations and thus be trapped in the endless prison of frames of identity and meaning and value from which there is no escape. 10,000 lifetimes you can live as a human being and not escape this fundamental trap, because you will simply not discover the power of suspending the urge of reference and how liberating that is. And from within the trap, if you make the urge of reference, if you have the urge to make the gesture of reference and you follow that urge from within the trap, it will just trap you more thoroughly every time you make a move. There are disciplines, logics. There's a broad array of different kinds of logics that are designed to help you with this trap. You might encounter ways of knowing like Korzybski's non-Aristotelian logics, or null A, or what is called General Semantics, that could conceivably liberate you. If you're super lucky, you might encounter Advaita Vedanta, or you might encounter Zen or something, right? If you're very lucky, and then you pursue the hell out of it, and you either get super lucky and you roll like a 100 on the first, sometime in the first week of your practice, you just break through. It does happen occasionally. It's very rare. Because what usually happens after that is you just get more mired in trouble the harder you try, right? And this should be obvious why, because the one thing you won't do is suspend the urge to make reference. You're going to try to figure out what moo means, right? Which is the goal, you think. What is moo? That's what the fucking teacher asks you. What is moo? So you think it's a what? Very similar to the what is the sound of one hand clapping. Well, that one hand is the urge to whatify things. And it goes what in the air, right? So, yeah, very trippy. Everything we had spoken of suggested to me for the first time in my life, no more references, right? Never mind no more presidents, no more references, no more presidents of consciousness, right? And it is said that if you cut through mu, it is as if you have cut through a roll of cable, right? Or a spool of string or thread. It cuts all the way through all the threads at once with a single swipe, right? Slices right through them all. And I started looking through the Book of Koans, the Mumonkan, right? Which is the primary book of koans in our lineage, the Mumonkan. What is it? The barrier, the gateless barrier, right? Gateless barrier is called. And it turns out that if you simply suspend the urge to commit the gesture of reference in consciousness, it resolves all koans. I looked at each koan and I was just thinking like, this is what happens if you suspend the urge of reference. Whoops, solved. Right? Why did Bodhidharma come from the West? Or not come from the West? Does the dog have Buddha nature or not? All these things there are immediately solved by the suspension of the urge to commit the gesture of reference in consciousness. Now, this probably won't cause enlightenment in my listeners to hear this. And this is partly why the koans exist, because you could have a 10,000 page book where all the pages are blank except the middle page, right? Page, I don't know, 4,999 or 5,001, or which page is the middle, right? This is the same kind of a problem. Which page is the middle? Is it the middle of the page in the middle of the book? Do you count the covers? Does the coverlet page count? Because it doesn't have a number, right? All of these questions that we plague ourselves with as humans all dissolve. All of them go away. And you just have liberation if you suspend the urge to commit the gesture of reference. Now, hearing this may help you. But this is why there's no 10,000 page book within the middle of the book, right, wherever that might be, is written, simply suspend the urge to commit the gesture of reference in consciousness, and you will be free. And the reason you will be free is that from that position, if that's your starting position, at the point of the cone of identity, right? From the point of the cone, or perhaps from the point or the ring, or perhaps from the point and the ring of the cone, you can then safely commit the gesture of reference, because you will return from that activity to non-identity. Right? Korzybski's solution, non-identity. A is not equal to A. One thing a tree will never be is a tree. A tree is a word. An actual tree is an infinite being, infinite qualities. Jesus. Unlike that horrifying nightmare of noise. So what happens is that if the place of your being is outside the trap, you can then descend safely into the trap and make reference or not freely, because you will always dissolve back into non-identity, right? This is what Korzybski was recommending. He wasn't a Zen master, he was a logician and a mathematician and an engineer and a spy in the 30s. such a brilliant mind. He tried to repair the cognition of humanity from a problem at its root. And he succeeded in locating the problem, and he succeeded in formulating a solution. What he didn't succeed was in making it contagious. He was a liberator of human minds. And he liberated many of them in his time, but his goal was to bring liberation to the world of human beings, not a few people. In his book, Science and Sanity, is the milestone of his life work. And the pivotal feature of that book, well, there's about 12 pivots. They're fairly simple, most of them. I won't explain them here. Others have done this well. It's not hard to find. But one of the pivotal features is a device that he calls the structural differential, with which you physically manipulate strings and pegs to understand the problem of identification and the trap that it comprises, and how it cannot be true. It is impossible for it to be true that what you think about something has anything to do with what the thing you're thinking about is. Because what you think about are referents. And no, what you think about are actually tokens of reference with a C on the end. And what actually exists are the things they point at, each of which have infinite qualities. And so what the humans do is this thing called excerption. They excerpt certain qualities for attention, promotion, evaluation, noticing, and so forth. And that excerption is the trap. That's the fingerprint of the trap that we are in as human beings. So I just got some news. Speaking of, this is the thing, right? So I'm going to do the opposite of what Bill was saying. I'm going to performatively explain something. But my son, some time ago, he called me. He's like, my buddy Reed, he's recovering from cancer and stuff, and they canceled his disability, and they gave him a bunch of forms and shit, and he can't fill them out. He can't understand the forms, and he doesn't understand what's necessary or why they canceled his disability, and he needs help. So I went down there, and over a couple days, I got all this documentation together. We filled out all the forms. Now, this is like 5 months ago now or something, right? And I just came across my friend. He's like, dude, I went to the bank on my disability card. I left $30 on it. And when I went there yesterday, there was $11,000 on my card, bro. You got it done. And I'm so happy. Right? Never mind Stoicism. We celebrate the joys of the people we love. Stoicism is valuable, reasonable, useful. But we still celebrate the victories of the people that we love and care about, especially if they're struggling and suffering, and we can alleviate some of that somehow. And yes, I get the whole parable about the farmer, right? His horse runs away. Everybody says, oh no, your only horse is gone. How terrible. And he says, maybe. A few days later, the horse comes back with 5 other horses. They all celebrate. Oh, amazing. Now you've got 6 horses. He's beautiful, wonderful. He says, maybe. And it goes on like this, right? Switching back and forth between catastrophe and joyful, abundance. Right? And of course, this is true. Okay, so back to what I was talking about. So Korzybski realized that there's nothing you can reference in language. Language is a trap because it depends on excerption, and the results of exertion are deceptive. Similar to the problem with the farmer. So he tried to get us out of that trap. He invented non-Aristotelian logic, null A, also known as General Semantics. But it was too sophisticated for common consumption. And some people have tried to resolve that since then in various ways. No one's had much luck. It's relatively difficult to get the common people to see it. In any case, probably me discussing this will not enlighten my listeners, but what it will do is establish the compass. It can give you a direction to travel toward that is trustworthy and that you can understand. Like, I never intellectually understood. I think I now intellectually understand the resolution of mu, but I haven't accomplished it. I haven't become that resolution, which is a non-verbal experience, non-intellectual experience. And yet, there is at least the possibility now. And I love having the lighthouse, right, on the ocean of consciousness where I can see the trap. Right? From the prison, you can't escape. It's very difficult to escape from within the prison. From outside the prison, you can travel into the prison and out of it safely. Right? As long as your identity, your nature is felt and established beyond the prison of the gestures of reference in consciousness. May we all achieve liberation and embody the potential for the virtues that are natural to our people and ancestors and world. And may your life be healed and beautiful. So grateful to have this time together today. And I look forward to learning and growing and discovering and dreaming with you all together with and for each other in the future, sometime soon. Thank you for joining me. Take a moment to leave a comment or a question or like my recording. It stimulates the algorithm. Bye-bye for now.